Hello. Welcome to episode 7 of the Get Organized for Life podcast series, where we talk about organization, time management, and workplace productivity, all served up in small bites because we know you're busy. I'm your host, Pat DePalma, productivity and organization specialist and owner of Organized for Life in Wilmington, Delaware. Last month, we were talking about how so many of us are crazy busy, how we feel like we have too many things to do and how we never get enough of it done and how it's stressing us all out. Well, the good news is it really doesn't have to be that way. We actually can have a staggering number of things to do and still feel relaxed and in control, productive, and fully present in the moment. Really, we can. One of the big ways we do this is by having a trusted system outside of our heads to manage all of these things that we need and want to do so that our minds are clear and we're able to focus on the task at hand. Okay, so how do we go about setting up such a system? Well, just with about everything else that's organizing and productivity related, the specifics are going to vary based on individual preferences and styles, but the overall requirements of a trusted time and task management system are really the same, and there are 3 main pieces. So the first piece is to choose a tool that you will use to collect all of these to-dos, and to gather up all of the current to-dos that are outstanding and enter them into that collection tools, either staging area, inbox, whatever you may want to call it, and commit to adding all incoming to-dos to this system. You want to have all of your to-do items in one place, and then you can move forward from there to manage them. The second step is that for everything that lands in this collection tools staging area, you're going to want to think about the task and determine the next actions that you need to take in order to move that task forward. Because a lot of times when we have to-do list items, they're not really well defined and we don't really know what the next step is. So we need to take a moment to figure that out and note that as part of the to-do list item. And then the third piece is we need to set up and keep reminders of our next actions that we've just accumulated in an organized system that we revisit regularly. And your system doesn't have to and really shouldn't be complicated. If it's too hard to follow, you're probably not going to use it properly. So for step 1, like I said, you're going to choose a tool that you're going to use to collect all of your to-do list items, and you really want to always have it with you. So this tool could be digital or paper-based, whichever's more comfortable for you and that you know that you'll come back to faithfully and sort through. So of course, digital tools, whether they're a simple note-taking app or a more fully featured task management app, can make this process easier because, you're probably never without your phone or some electronic device of some kind. And here's the big step. You're going to find and gather up all of what David Allen calls our open loops. That's anything big or small that's taking our attention, that doesn't belong where it is the way it is, that just isn't finished. So the open loops are all of those piles of papers that we need to do something with, our current to-do lists, our Post-it notes, and all of those things in our heads that haven't actually made it to a note or a list yet. These could be a big to-do item like renovate office or something as small as buy more printer paper. We need to get all of these items off of our desk, our fridge, our mind, our kitchen table, and put them into this one area of our collection tool in the inbox or the staging area. And then every time we get a new input that requires our attention, every time, no matter where it comes from, we need to get that into our system right away, or at least as soon as possible, before it has a chance to clog up our mind. So after we've done all that, step 2 is to go through each of those items that we've now dumped into our inbox. Then we need to stop and take a little time to identify the specific next action that we need to take to proceed toward getting that item done, and then maybe even reword the item if you need to. So, for example, if your to-do list item is buy more printer paper, you might want to make it more specific, something like go to Staples and buy more printer paper. And as you're reviewing each item, you also want to keep in mind, how important that item is to you and when you're going to want or need to get it done by. So basically, it's relative priority level to you. And then as new items come into this inbox, as they come to your attention and you put them in your new system, they can sit there for a little while until you have some time to do this decision making, to decide, what they really are and what, if anything, you need to do about them. But we have to remember not to let them sit in the inbox too long. We have to look at the items that are in there on a regular basis and move them forward in the process so that it continues to be a workable system and not just, a new dumping ground for your to-do list items. And, this is actually a really crucial step, because if we don't translate all of this miscellaneous unfinished stuff that's in our heads and our inboxes, our Post-its, our random lists and piles, if we don't take all of that and translate it into a logical, coherent itemization of useful actions, we really have no hope of controlling it. We can't really get organized or be productive if all we're doing is, reshuffling lists and piles of nebulous things. I mean, that's what a lot of us do, right, with our to-do list. We write them and rewrite them and move things around, but we don't always actually make any progress on getting them done. And a lot of that is because it's not clearly written what our next steps are, what we should do. So we need to take this step to think about these things in order to know what we then need to do to drive them forward to resolution, to actually get them done. If you think about it, what we're really managing then are our actions against our to-do list items, right? We don't really get stuck because we don't have enough time. We really get stuck because we just don't have a good handle on what it is that we need to be doing. So step 3, once we've gotten everything into our tool and once we've clarified the list with all of the next actions, we need to set up and keep reminders of the actions that we've now identified and keep them in an organized system, that we're going to review and update regularly. Gathering all our to-dos and identifying the next actions needed is only really going to clear our mind when we add this piece, this trusted reminder system and methodology. So there are essentially 2 types of reminders. There are those that are time or date specific, and there are those that are not. So time or date specific items need to be put on your calendar, right? So some of these are obvious, such as appointments and scheduled meetings, and others are maybe a little bit more flexible. So if you need, for example, to order more pens by the end of the week, then this is the part where you find a spot in your calendar this week and schedule a few minutes to actually order them. Because as you may know, that which gets scheduled gets done. When you're putting items in your calendar from your next action list, you can try to batch some tasks that are less time specific based on perhaps where you will be when you accomplish a task. So, for example, if you have several errands to run, you can batch them together and then schedule time to do them all while you're out driving around, rather than making a bunch of separate different trips on different days. Or if you have a bunch of admin tasks that need to get done at your desk, you can block a couple of hours on your calendar to sit there and get them all done. Then for those items that aren't quite ready for your calendar yet, you want to keep a separate list of those, a next actions type of list. And it can be just one list, but if it's a long list, which it probably is, you might want to divide that list into various subcategories. Maybe, and there are a number of different ways you can do this, but one of them is based on, for example, what it is or where you need to be able to do it. So, for example, let's say you have a next action list and you might have a subheading of calls to make. So you have a block and you say, I need to call this person, this person, this person. Because, if you're like me and you really don't like making phone calls and you procrastinate, it can help to just pick a time, schedule in your calendar, and just knock them all out in a row, because getting started is really just the hardest part. And you're going to need some other lists too, and that's going to depend on your particular situation like everything else. But you're probably going to need a list for various projects that you want to accomplish or actions that you can't take until someone else does their next step, and maybe a list for some things that you want to do someday. So they're not something you're ready to schedule in your calendar yet, but you don't want to lose track of the fact that I want to learn to salsa dance, or I want to take art lessons, or those things. Instead of keeping that all in the back of your head, like this is what I want to do someday, you can have a list of all of that. And then you'll revisit that periodically. Because that's the key to the whole thing, is that we need to set up a process for reviewing all these lists that's going to ensure that we're always going to be reminded of what we need to do in sufficient time to get it done. That's where the trust comes in. So at minimum, you're going to want a daily and a weekly review process. And you're probably going to want another less frequent review where you maybe look at those someday items once a month and say, hey, am I ready to start proceeding on this or not? Of course, you're going to be looking at your calendar the most, but you're also going to need to regularly review the items on these lists to see what you should move to your calendar and also to see what you can get done if you have a little bit of discretionary time in your day. The frequency of these reviews is going to vary somewhat from person to person, but the real point is to have a system for reviewing your calendar and your lists as often as you need to get what's on them off your mind. And the more complete that your system is, the more you're going to trust it. And that's really our whole point here, isn't it? You need to be able to trust the system that you set up so that your mind is free of all of these random thoughts and things to do. So yes, setting up and using your new time and task management system is going to take a little effort, and it's going to take some getting used to. It's almost certainly going to require some tweaks along the way as you kind of refine what's working for you and what's not. But once you use it consistently for a while, it really will become second nature, and you're going to wonder how you ever got through life without it. You've been listening to the Get Organized for Life podcast with productivity and organization specialist Pat DePalma. Thank you so much for joining us.